few things that I wanna say. I say yes, you say no way. Living most of disagreeable. You love me night, I love you now. I love the sun, you love the moon. Living most of disagreeable.
And welcome to As It Is Written. I'm your host for this evening, Johanna Bat Israel, and tonight we're continuing our program that we have set up for Black History, this smallest month of the year that is set aside for Black History. And who I have here with me tonight is my sister, Tamar Bat Israel. Welcome, Tamar.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you tonight.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
This night, like I said, we're going to be dealing with Black history, and we have a couple of things that I think you're going to be very pleased with as far as your remembrances of information that's happened past. Oftentimes, when we deal with Black history, people only think as far back as the Civil Rights era, which is only 30 or so years. And on other occasions, they also think back only as far as 300 or so years for our slavery period. But as we know, Black history has come along with us much further along. We're speaking more than 2,000 years before the birth of Christ, because our people are the Hebrew Israelites of the Scriptures. And tonight, as I said, one of the things we want to focus on is the atrocities that have taken place against our people throughout the years, throughout this Black history. In particular, the title of this program is The History of the Barbaric Practices Against Yah's Chosen People. And as I said, we want to scan the gamut. Particularly, we want to go all the way back to Egyptian time and bring it all the way back again to today's modern time with today's common practices that are going on in the newspapers and CNN every day against our people. Sister Tamar, could you open up and give us a little information in history as far as our people and the atrocities against our people during the Egyptian captivity?
Absolutely. And as you stated in your opening, there really is nothing new under the sun. People really think about what happened to us when we were brought here as slaves and the cruel and barbaric treatment that we received then, as well as on the plantations when we were beaten and tortured, burned and whipped. But this treatment goes back all the way back to the very first of the world empires, which is Egypt, obviously. And unfortunately, because the nations always knew who we were, that we were the holy children of Yahweh, they had this hatred for us that hasn't stopped to this very day. All the nations still hate our people. And although we have become very docile today, we still are hated. So when you get back into the Egyptian captivity, I want to pick up in the scriptures, Exodus chapter 1, and just talk a little bit about the hatred of the Africans. And unfortunately today, our people want to identify with these Africans, or the ancient Africans, the Egyptians, but they were our very first taskmasters. So in Exodus chapter 1, this is when our people had first went into Egypt. In verse 7 it says, "And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them." Verse 10, "And the Pharaoh said, Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there fall out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. So therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they grew and multiplied, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel." And then finally, of course, we know that the Pharaoh demanded of the Hebrew midwives. In verse 16, he said, "When you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew woman, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall be left alive." But the midwives feared Yah and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And then, of course, when Pharaoh talked to the midwives about this, here's their answer. It said, verse 19, "And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered before we come in unto them." And then finally, verse 22 said, "And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, Every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive." And of course we know that Moses was brought out of the river and reared by Pharaoh's daughter as his own grandson, to his own demise, obviously. But the Egyptians have always hated our people and treated them cruelly. And we know that when we were about to leave Egypt, of course, they were coming at us with all their chariots and with all their might to destroy us. Finally, once and for all. But Yahweh has always intervened for our people. The nations have not destroyed us, and they never will destroy us. And as a matter of fact, it's the same way today. The more they afflict us, the more we grow.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, as a matter of fact, you were speaking about our identifying present day to the Africans, and even so much calling ourselves African Americans.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, when you research the scriptures, Yahweh says that he makes a difference between the Africans and the Egyptians.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, the Egyptians and the Hebrews.
Right.
So it's, although we tend to look somewhat similar, there is totally a difference, and Yahweh has stated that. And that was even set up when we talked about Abraham's son, Isaac.
Right.
Because throughout the entire time, Yahweh said that that Abraham had his only son, Isaac. And we know that he had an older son that was that came out of
part Egyptian.
Exactly. But he didn't consider him as his son.
You know, that's a good point, because let me show a copy of this book to our audience, because this book, while it has a lot of good information, and especially the front cover, as you can see, is this picture of the ancient Egyptians. We do look very much like them, but we are not the same people. They come from the lineage of Ham, and we come from the lineage of Shem. So two different races or nations of people completely. And you're absolutely right, because we don't know who we are. And this blindness, this curse of blindness that we talked to our audience about last week in Deuteronomy 28th chapter, which has come over us, we don't know who we are. And so therefore we've been searching ever since and trying to find an identity. And so finally, as soon as we realized, after they began to unearth the pharaohs, that the Egyptians were black, contrary to Hollywood, that they were white men, we began to latch on to the fact that we were Africans. But we're not African. We are the Hebrew Israelites, the chosen and the cursed of Yahweh.
Latching on to a nation simply because of color would be the same as us latching on to the people who are called Indians from India. They are very dark people as well. But it is quite apparent that we're different peoples.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, they're actually European.
That's right.
But most people don't understand that, because all the nations, the three main races, came in many different hues and many different colors. But of course, we don't know, because you know the old saying, put it in the book, Israel will never know it.
Well, Tamar, you told us a little bit about the Egyptian captivity. Now let's move forward on the timeline a little bit into the Assyrian captivity. Tell us a little bit about the harsh treatment that we received at the hands of the Assyrians and the types of torture procedures that they held against us.
Well, you know, the history of our people, when Yahweh brought us out of Egypt, which of course was the America of that time, he destroyed Egypt as a nation. I mean, the 10 plagues literally just did a lot of harm and damage to the Egyptians, including killing the firstborn of every household. So when he brought us out, of course, he gave us his laws, statutes, and judgments. We didn't want to hear it. And he promised us in Deuteronomy 28th chapter that if we did not, he was going to bring these nations upon us to overtake us and to put us into captivity. So we stayed in the land, of course, for a long time. We had judges, we had kings, but finally 10 tribes, or they called today the 10 lost tribes, were taken out of the land and settled in what is called Turkey today, which was ancient Assyria. They were settled all up in the Middle East and finally up into Europe. And that's why we have so-called Negroes all over in Europe today, and they've been there for a very long time. They are the so-called 10 lost tribes. But the Assyrians, I mean, these were Shemitic people, just like we are. So they're closer to us in kin than the ancient Africans.
Cousins of a sort.
Cousins of a sort. But I tell you, they weren't kissing cousins. No. They were very, very cruel. And I'd like to share with you some of the things that these people actually said and did as they took our people captive. Now, of course, the 10 lost tribes were taken, but not only that, they also besieged the city of Lachish, which was a Judean town, and we are the Jews, the people that are here in America today. Listen to this. This is about their cruelty. And this is coming from this is called When Your Enemies Are the Size of Assyria. It says, the Assyrians commanded a vast empire with a ruthless and terrorizing army. They were the superpower of the day, and they weren't governed by democracy, rules of war, the Geneva Convention, news media, UN resolutions, or international law. There was no fear of war crime tribunals after they tortured and obliterated the nations they attacked. Below are some of the journal entries of their commanders. It says, these are the commanders of the Assyrian army. He says, I destroyed, I demolished, I burned. I took their warriors prisoners and impaled them on stakes before their cities, flayed the nobles, as many as had rebelled, and spread their skin out on the piles of dead corpses. Many of the captives I burned in a fire. Many I took alive. For some I cut off their hands to the right. For others I cut off their noses, ears, and fingers. I put out the eyes of many of the soldiers. And this is taken from Time Life Books, time frame 1500 to 600 BC. In another one, it states, listen to this. It states, I slew 260 fighting men. I cut off their heads and made pyramids thereof. I slew one of every two. I built a wall before the great gates of the city. I flayed. Do you know what flayed means? I'm sure our audience have no idea.
Peeling.
Peeled off their skin, okay? I flayed the chief men of the rebels, and I covered the walls with their skin. Some of them were enclosed alive in the bricks of the wall. Some of them were crucified on stakes along the wall. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what happened to Yahshua. He was crucified on a stake, or impaled, if you will, on a stake. I caused a great multitude of them to be flayed in my presence, and I covered the wall with their skins. I gathered together the heads in the form of crowns, and their pierced bodies in the form of garlands. Now you're talking about cruelty. It doesn't come any crueler than the Assyrians, that's for sure. Here's another picture here where this was actually the taking of our people in Assyria, and you can see how the Hebrew Israelites were laid out to be flayed, their skin to be flayed.
Right.
And can you imagine being alive and someone peeling off your skin?
No.
So again, the nations have always hated our people and have always treated us the most cruel of every other nation there is. Why? Because we are Yahweh's chosen people. Because Yahweh chose us, they hated us.
Right.
Because of course their father was and is Lucifer the devil, for sure.
Is that all you that you had on there? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, Sister Tamar, that is certainly phenomenal to hear, such detail and so forth as to what they were doing to our people as far as the torture goes.
Let me share a couple of more photographs that I have about the Assyrians, though, because I think this really tells how the Hebrews looked as well. This is one of the taking of the Hebrews, and of course you see the Assyrian guard. The Assyrians, of course, they were dark people, but they wore their hair long. The Hebrew Israelites were commanded, the males were commanded that they should keep their locks at their earlobes, so they kept their locks cut at the length of their earlobes. Women were to grow their hair long. They were also commanded to have a full beard. And you can see this in these photographs of these Judean men that they captured in the city of Lachish.
Right.
So, of course, this proves, and this picture is actually in the British Museum, and when you look at it, you can see it proves the color of the Hebrews, it proves the kinky hair, because these bas reliefs, this is exactly what they did. They would choose to make the kinkiness look like little raised dots.
Right, I see that.
Absolutely. So it's real imperative that we get back into the history books and find out our history. We've been through all the empires, and we've been treated like dogs.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
America is no different.
Yeah. Now, as you were reading, you were speaking. One of the things that happened to our people was the impaling, in particular the crucifixion and so forth. And that was specific. I believe that they did that specifically to us, to be more demeaning than standard, just killing us.
Right.
And that was because it broke our law.
Oh,
That
of
Yahweh
course.
gave us. And I want to go ahead and read that out of Deuteronomy so we can get a little understanding from that. And that's Deuteronomy 21, and I'm going to start with 22. And it says, and if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but you shall in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of Yahweh, that thy land not be defiled, which Yahweh the Elohim giveth thee for an inheritance. So truly, by having them remain out there, they, in addition to the disrespect and the torture that they've done to them, they've also caused them to become a curse.
Right. And that's going to be real important as we move through this timeline and talk about the Romans who used crucifixion pretty much against us specifically.
Right.
And also, of course, the modern day Romans, America, because they've all done it. One of the other things that the Assyrians love to do, and I think I spoke about that when I talked about the Assyrians, but this is a picture where the soldiers were actually carrying around heads on a pointed stick. I mean, these were trophies.
Right.
And even when you get into the European history, in the ancient Europeans' history, they would cut off the heads of people and put them on their Christmas trees. So this is nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. This barbaric treatment has always gone on, and therefore, I look at people today and they look at what's happening over in Iraq and they're so shocked and they can't believe that someone would drag someone out of a car and behead them or hang them. It's nothing new under the sun. They've been treating us like that for hundreds of years.
And dealing with the picture that you just showed, as far as the beheading and putting it on a stick and so forth, that's very similar to what happened to our first king, Saul. And to his sons.
Exactly.
That they beheaded him and carried his head around as a trophy, and then took his body and nailed it to a wall.
Absolutely.
So these are exactly the same things that have been cited throughout the scriptures as to what has happened to us.
Absolutely. Like I said, there's nothing new under the sun.
Okay. Okay, sister, let's move on to the next captivity, as if these weren't bad enough. Let's move on to the Babylonian captivity. What happened to us during that time?
Okay, well, the Babylonians, again, were some of our cousins. They were Shemites, or what people would call Arabs today. In the same country that America is holding captive today, the same country, Babylon, we were there as their slaves as well. And the book of Daniel is pretty much talking about the Babylonian captivity. And some of the other things that they love to do to us is to make us eat unclean foods, because as you stated, our law was such that we couldn't do this. So I'm going to pick it up there first in Daniel chapter 1. And I'm going to pick it up in verse 6, verse 5. It says, "And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Yehuda, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name Belshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." And of course, he chose to eat vegetables only. And he said, well, listen, bring us back before the king after so long a time, and if we're not as fit as the ones who's eating your swine, then, we'll go to doing that. But of course, Yahweh gave them a blessing, because they were just as strong and just as fit, and ended up the 4 of them being chosen to stand before King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, of course, one of the things also that our people were commanded not to do was to worship pagan gods. So King Nebuchadnezzar decided that he was going to build this great, statue of a man. And when people heard the music, they would have fall down and worship this great image. So I'd like to go to Daniel chapter 3 and talk about this image for a minute. And I'm going to pick it up at Daniel chapter 3, verse 8. Whereof at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worship, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. That was their method of killing us off. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded you. They serve not your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. And of course, he brings them in, right? And then verse 16 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer you in this manner. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. And then, of course, we know what happened, and hopefully you've picked up the picture where they actually threw these brothers in this furnace of fire. And in verse 24, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, and walking in the midst of the fire. They have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the son of Elohim. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High Yah, come forth and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth from the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of the fire had passed on before them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the Elohim of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and you have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Now that truly is a story of deliverance.
Truly. When
you serve Yahweh and you do what he says, even we will be delivered from this captivity. Although we've gone through so much, such horrific cruelty, we're even going to be delivered from this, just as he delivered our people during the Babylonian captivity.
Absolutely.
But the Babylonians weren't through there.
No.
They were not through there, because while Daniel and his brothers were in Babylon, there was still our people that was over in the land of Jerusalem. And the final captivity, or the besieging of our people, came in 607 BC. And believe me, sister, this was so terrible that the scriptures in Deuteronomy 28 about us eating our own children actually came to pass. We literally ate our own children. We can pick that up actually in the book of Lamentations, as well as, and I'm going to pick it up actually in where Yahweh pronounced this way before it happened, in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 28. Deuteronomy chapter 28, and I'm going to pick it up. If you find it before me.
Around 55, I believe.
Okay, verse 53. And you shall eat the fruit of your own body, the flesh of your sons and of your daughters, which Yahweh your Elohim have given you, in the siege and in the straitness wherewith your enemies shall distress you, so that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eye shall be evil toward his brother, and toward the wife of his bosom, and toward the remnant of his children which he shall leave, so that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children whom he shall eat, because he has nothing left him in the siege and in the straitness wherein your enemies shall distress you in all your gates. So truly this came to pass when the Babylonians came upon us and besieged our city. We literally ate our own children.
Yeah. Now, sister, let's move on to the Medo-Persian captivity. What happened during that time?
I tell you what,
that was still dealing with Daniel, right?
the Medo-Persian captivity. Yes, it was, and that's really interesting because the Medes and the Persians loved to deal with lions. They like to put us in lions' dens. So I'm going to pick up the story about Daniel in the lion's den, and hopefully the camera can pick up this picture here about that. Sister, is it possible you can hold this so that the camera, this needs to hold on this side? And you can see down below a picture of a lion, and the caption says, "A lion eating a Negro." Now this was an ancient, I guess it's a bas relief that was unearthed via archaeology. And this was depicted of them eating a so-called Negro. They were calling us back in the 800s BC Negroes at that time.
Right.
So let me pick this up where Danielle was actually thrown in the lion's den while you do that. Okay. I'm going to pick this up at...
Now, while you find that, I'm going to go ahead and read this.
Okay.
It says, in this ivory panel from Nimrod, the Phoenician artist has depicted a lioness seizing a Negro boy by the throat. The naturalistic treatment contrasts with the more stylized lion of the top picture.
Listen to this. This is in Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. Now again, Darius had decreed that, of course, everybody would worship him. This is now the Medes and the Persians are Europeans. As a matter of fact, this was the first European empire that came upon the earth and, of course, held our people in captivity back in 539 BC. Today we would call these Russians and Iranians. Persians were the Iranians, the Russians, Medes were Russians. Now, listen to this. This is verse 4. It said, "Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his Elohim." I'm going to skip down to verse 8. "Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into the house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks to the Elohim of Israel." Now I'm going to skip down to verse 15. "These men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake unto Daniel, and said unto Daniel, Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel." And of course we know what happened. Daniel, there was no hurt upon him at all. The lions were sitting there just as docile. In verse 22 it says, verse 21 says, "Then Daniel said unto the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and has shut the lion's mouth, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before you, O king, have I done no hurt." Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the lion's den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions that had mastery over them, and break all their bones in pieces, or ever that came at the bottom of the den. So, of course, they love to use lions to slay us.
Absolutely.
Much like the Romans did as well. We'll get to that.
Right, during the Colosseums. I believe we're going to be having a short break now. We're going to have a news report shortly. And when we get the word, we'll go ahead and transfer to that.
Okay.
But in the meantime, speaking on the lions, like you said, they certainly had a desire to dealing with us in that. We're going to go ahead and pick up our news report.
Okay.
Okay.
Shalom, this is Ariel Ben Yisrael in the news on As It Is Written. There were more than 3,000 reported lynchings in the good old US of A between the years of 1882 and 1900. Georgia led the nation in lynchings between 1883 and 1923. Almost a century later, Georgia is getting recognition worldwide from black track athletes from Decatur winning gold medals in the Olympics, to the super boom of music industry entrepreneurs and entertainers coming out of Atlanta. Looks like things are going well for Judah and Georgia today, doesn't it? Well, look again. We're not out of the woods yet, no pun intended. Just last year, the Atlanta Crackers chose to relish in the age-old Roman-like tactic of fear and punishment. On October 13, 2004, at 8:40 a.m., 21-year-old Bernard Cantrell Burton's black body was found hanging from a red oak tree in the neighborhood of Grantville in Coweta County, Georgia. Coweta officials questioned whether Burton's death was suicide resulting from problems with his girlfriend, who was a Euro-Gentile, and not murder because he dated a white woman and lived in a white community. Atlanta media has already buried this terroristic act in their Who Cares files, while Grantville PD waited more than 24 hours before reporting the hanging to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Also last year, Georgia's Confederate cousin, the Crooked Letter State, found itself the site of America's oldest, most beloved domestic terroristic tradition. On April 23, 2004, in Wilkinson County, Woodville, Mississippi, the body of Roy Veal was found dangling from a pecan tree with a pillowcase over his head and a rope around his neck. The 55-year-old Vietnam veteran was spotted by two turkey hunters at 9 a.m. that day. Mr. Veal's family members are convinced his death was lynching related to an ongoing legal battle over land co-titled to the Veal family and white neighbors. Mr. Veal, originally from Wilkinson County, returned from then residents of Seattle, Washington, to present documentation to prove his family's ownership of the land in question. The land has been in his family for 3 generations, since the late 19th century. After being in town only 3 days, his body was allegedly found with burnt papers beneath his feet. Veal's grandfather and his brothers owned the 40 acres. Veal's mother, now 79, has lived there since she was 18 years old. According to Roy Veal's cousin, Alvin Bailey, several years ago, a now deceased relative sold her part of the land to a white neighbor who has since tried to claim the entire 40 acres. Mississippi Department of Public Safety spokesperson Warren Stain declared the death as, quote-unquote, consistent with suicide. That might fly, with the exception of the fact that the man was hooded before he was murdered. The Associated Press has reported a pattern in which our people were cheated out of land or driven from it through intimidation, violence, and murder. There have been cases where the government officials approved and or participated in the land jackings. The earliest account of these jackings date back before the Civil War, with a significant number under current litigation. Black politicians were virtually non-existent during the Jim Crow period. Today, they only respond to the chieftain checkbooks of special personal interest groups. Brothers like Roy Veal and Bernard Cantrell Burton will once again be asked or be drafted to be on the front lines of Uncle Sam's crusades on terror abroad, while the U.S. wages relentless war against their families at home, and they as well when they return. This has been Ariel Ben Yisrael in the news on As It Is Written.
Hello and welcome back to As It Is Written. Again, tonight we're dealing with the history of the barbaric practices against Yah's chosen people. And what we were dealing with prior to the break was the Medo-Persian captivity. And we were dealing with how our people were tortured during that time. And one of the preferred types of torture was dealing with the lions, as we were speaking, particularly with Daniel in the lion's den. A lot of people hear about that oftentimes during their church services, Daniel in the lion's den, because everyone loves to talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You always hear that, but you don't really hear the entire story. You don't hear about the true dedication that Daniel had to his God Yahweh, and specifically to the laws of his God Yahweh, because that's what it was all about. He would not sway from the laws of his God. And a lot of times when we hear about that whole Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego story, it doesn't deal with the laws. Because if they dealt with the laws, then you'd have to deal with the laws again today. Because the same laws that stood then still stand today and will stand forever.
Absolutely. And that's what I don't understand. You know, people claim that they read the Bible, but the Bible is history. It's all about the history of a particular people. And you can trace this history, and you can't find any other group of people to fit this bill except us. So why not accept the fact that truly we are the Jews? We are the chosen of Yah, and the reason we are in this condition is because we did not keep Yah's laws, statutes, and judgments. But like the scripture says throughout, if even in the land of your captivity, if you turn to Yahweh, He will turn back to you. And we are the remnant of those in our day and age who have turned back to Yahweh, and we've begun to walk again in His laws, statutes, and judgments. And that's why we're doing these shows, because we're trying to reach those out in our audience who want to turn back, and to give them a place of sanctuary, to be able to keep Yahweh's laws, statutes, and judgments.
Absolutely. And as far as giving people an opportunity to turn back, and giving people a place to keep His holy days and to hit a place of sanctuary, we'd like to invite you out to NCCI. And our address is 3901A Covington Highway, Decatur, Georgia, 332. Our phone number is 404-286-5869. And we also have a website, which we certainly implore you to go and check out, because it's an excellent website that deals with your future, your present, and your past. And the website address is www.thencci, and that's spelled THENCCI.com. And you can also call us here tonight if you have any questions, comments, or concerns dealing with the topic that we're dealing with this evening. And our phone number here tonight is 404-873-1349. And that's 404-873-1349. But getting back to our program, Sister Tamar, as you were stating, you previously told us about a portion of the Medo-Persian captivity, but there's more to go on with that. Please enlighten us.
Well, you know, again, these were the first Europeans to rule the earth, the Iranians and the Russians. Now, there was a Russian king named Ahasuerus, and we were plentiful in that empire because, again, we had been spread all. Judah was now in Babylon, and we were, again, under the Medo-Persians. And there was a time when this particular king decided that he would, host this fair to decide who was the most beautiful woman in the world, in his kingdom, to be his queen. That most beautiful woman just happened to be a Hebrew Israelite. Of course, they always have loved our women, and they still do. And her name was Esther. And you may hear a lot of our folks name their children Queen Esther. Well, that's where this comes from. Esther, however, she didn't reveal the fact that she was a Jew when she first became queen to King Ahasuerus. Her uncle was named Mordecai, and the book of Esther is about Esther and Mordecai, her uncle. Mordecai was a very devout Jew, of course. Although he was out of the land, he still kept the laws and statutes of Yahweh. But he had a very, very direct enemy, if you will, and this enemy was very high in relation to the king. So in chapter 3 of Esther, verse 6, it says, now Haman was his name, and he wanted Mordecai to bow to him and treat him like a king. And of course, that's forbidden for us, because we should not worship anything, man, woman, or any animal or anything as a god. So in verse 5 it says, and when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. And people, you know, you hear about the story of Purim, which is one of the so-called Jews' festivals.
Right.
Well, the word Purim comes from the fact that this decree went out from the king to destroy all the Jews. And I'm talking about serious genocide of our people during this period of time. And she then had to reveal herself to the king that, hey, you get ready to destroy my people. I'm a Jew. And therefore she fasted for I think about 30 days, and then she went in and revealed to the king that she too was a Jew. And it came to pass that Mordecai was also very close to the king because he had saved the king's life. So this was the man that this man Haman was about to try to destroy, along with all his people. And of course we see what happened over in chapter 7. Esther said, well, let's bring him to a banquet. And then she told him, she made this banquet, and of course Haman thought that he was coming in to be honored. But he had made this gallows because they love to hang people. And of course we know that the Americans love hanging too. So the gallows that he had built for Mordecai and the Jews, in chapter 7 we find that he himself was hanged. And I'm going to pick this up. Verse 5, it says, and the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he and where is he that do presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. Let me go up a little bit further because I want you to see what Esther says. Verse 3, then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we have been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. And of course, I've already read that part. Now listen to this, verse 7. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed where Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, stand in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. So not only Haman, but all his family, his sons, his wives, everyone were hanged because this is what they were planning to do to the Hebrews at this time.
Exactly. And just like nothing's new under the sun, even the term gallows that we were just now dealing with, oftentimes you think that term is a more recent term because it's most famous in France, for the Frenchmen that were hanging people constantly in the gallows and so forth. But as we see here, it is way back in BC 510 where people were being hanged on gallows still at that point in time.
Absolutely.
But I believe we have a caller.
Okay.
Caller, welcome to As It Is Written. And please give us your question or comment. Hello. Speak up a little louder. We can barely hear you. Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Yes, I was watching your program, and I was very pleased with what you were talking about. The only thing is that it seems as though our people are not aware of the barbaric treatment we've received from this country and from other nations on the earth. And you look at the way our children behave themselves out in the street, and you think that they are equal to everybody on earth, but yet still they build a prison house just for black people, and most of the courts are full of black people. But it seems as though nobody's letting the young people know that these things are being done against them. And I appreciate that information you're putting on. I wish everybody would tune into this program, because there's a lot of good information being put out, and you sisters keep doing a good job.
Well, thank you, brother. We definitely shalom. And that is definitely the case, that our people have been continuously targeted and are still constantly targeted. and it continues. And we have to truly open our eyes and see what it is, and return back to our God, because
Right.
that's our only salvation.
That's our only hope.
It's not, you know, there have been so many different things we've done over the years, and none of them have come to a complete closure of our situation. The only closure that we have is Yah and His ways.
Absolutely.
I believe we have another caller. Caller, welcome to As It Is Written. Hello, caller.
Yes. Shalom.
Shalom.
As I was listening to you about the book of Esther, there's another important part in this story. How Jews, at one point at this point in our history, we were not allowed to carry weapons. But when Ishtar made the stand, she also went ahead and she decreed that all the Jews should take up weapons. And in a very short period of time, the Jews destroyed about 78,000 of their enemies. And then the word Purim, this holiday Purim, is what this is supposed to remind us of, is how we did take up arms and destroy our enemies that come up against us. Which I say about the nonviolence movement. Yahweh have never took us anywhere, and it was a peaceful movement, nonviolence, for us to recapture our position. So there will be a war, and the people are not quite prepared for it, but we as a people are the most prominent people of the past. Right now, we are the most prominent people of the present, considering how they marked us off as Generation X, and we, in this generation, they marked off as an X, happens to be the most prosperous generation that has ever hit the soil for black people. And we are also the people of the future, because the scripture verified that we will be back, and everyone will come back to us again. And we will teach them. But my point is that this thing about nonviolent movement, this is a source of their education, how they go everywhere, and they say the first thing they want to do is educate. And they educate people to be dumb to the true facts of what's going on. Again, I would like to say thank you, because the program is very, very great. The website is also. Shalom to the entire house of NCCI. Thank you.
Thank you. Shalom, brother. And we definitely appreciate that comment. And you're right, there is going to be a war, and that war is called Armageddon. I mean, it is certainly coming. Anyone, if we were to truly read the scriptures, we would see that, because it was prophesied throughout time. And when the Messiah comes back, he is coming back not peacefully. He's coming back to take over this whole thing that's going on here. Sister, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope.
Now, we were just speaking about previously, getting back to what we were talking about France and the gallows and so forth. Another captivity that we didn't deal with, I wanted to just throw in there really quickly, is our people spent some time in Medina, the Jews in Medina. And at that point, the Jews were living in Medina. We had taken over that place, or we were living in that area alongside with a lot of Muslims.
Okay.
And we were pretty much everybody was living pretty comfortably, except for at some point there was obviously disagreements and so forth, because our people at that time were pretty good as far as dealing with the commerce and so forth like that. When Muhammad came into the land, he decided to make some changes. Now, some of our people, we had 3 tribes there. 2 of the tribes went ahead and left. The 3rd tribe, however, didn't leave. Our tribe stayed in Medina. And upon staying, what happened was another nation came up, and basically we pretty much connected with that other nation and made plans to go against the Muslims, together with that other nation against the Muslims. Of course, they found out, because obviously we are not to be connecting with other nations in that matter anyway.
Confederacies.
Exactly. So we were breaking Yahweh's laws in doing that.
Right.
And in retribution for that, as usual, it came down. And what happened was that Muhammad commanded that our people, all the men were lined up. There were about 800 men, and they had to pretty much dig a trench. It was called the Battle of the Trenches.
Wow.
And what happened was he individually, one by one, beheaded 800 men. And after they beheaded the 800 men, they took the women and the children, and those that they didn't take for their own pleasure, they sold them off into the salt mines and to eat further down into Africa. Exactly. So this was another situation where torture and harsh treatment of our people came about.
Right, right. And people don't understand that the Muslims, or the Arabs, they hate us too.
Right.
I mean, the slave trade was pretty much primarily by Africans and the Muslims, who at that time had become Islamists. But even in the Quran, it talks about the cruel treatment of the Jews throughout the Sub-Sahara as well as in the Middle East by our neighboring cousins, if you will. So I believe every word that you're saying, absolutely.
As a matter of fact, it's even documented in the Quran when it speaks about the people of the book. The people of the book. We are those people of the book. And I believe we have a caller.
Okay.
Caller, if you're still there, please welcome to As It Is Written. Caller?
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Yes, I will have a question for you. This is something that has really been troubling me because I've really been searching for the truth. I've studied with many different man-made religions and everything because I am seeking. But one thing that I do believe in my heart, that we are the Jews. Why is it that the preachers, the pastors, the bishops, and all of them that reads this Bible and knows it better than someone like me is not telling the people who they really are?
That's a very good question, sister. When people don't give us the truth, then they truly are lying to us. And in lying to us, they're hiding the truth. And basically, they have other desires. They don't have they don't have positive desires. Their desires are elsewhere. In all honesty, I mean, because all the scriptures tell us throughout the scriptures that we are to keep Yahweh's laws, statutes, and judgments. It's very simple. Throughout the scriptures, you'll read, and it continuously shows us a story where our people were keeping our ways and things went well for us. When we went against Yahweh's laws, then things went poorly for us, majorly poorly for us. And those things, and we went back and we repented, and then we went back and did the same thing again. And these things constantly went on and on. When the Messiah came, his first thing was repent. Repent from what? Repent from sinning. What is sin? We go back to 1 John, I believe it's 3. It says, what is sin? Sin is a transgression of the law. What is the law? You got to go back to the Old Testament. Go back to the first 5 books. First 5 books tells us what the law is. So the scriptures, the entire book is complete. I mean, it's a circle. It's complete. It tells us everything from beginning to end. It goes backwards and forwards. You just keep going back. In the New Testament, it keeps going back in the scriptures. As it is written, which is the name of the show, which is because we're continuously talking about the scriptures. So these things are not hidden. It's right here for everyone to see. So anyone who does not tell, if they call themselves a teacher and does not teach what is in the book that they claim to read and teach out of, there's certainly an issue. And I truly, I'm concerned with their, what their desires are. Their desires, I would think, are not positive. And I believe there's, brother, is that you're telling me is another call? Okay, all right. When you can pull up the other call, and sister, if you have any other questions, please stop by NCCI and get more information.
And what she has to understand is that they have been indoctrinated with these lies called Christianity. It has nothing to do with the scriptures. It's about the history of Christianity and taking a verse and making a 2-hour sermon on. So they are a part of the blind of our people. They don't know. They are blinded to the truth. And the love of money is the root of all evil. They are greedy dogs. They love to tell a lie. And again, the curse for our people is, our people even ask, teach us smooth things, prophesy deceit, lie to us. So that's why the churches are filled every Sunday morning, because we want to hear these lies. We don't want to deal with the truth because we're afraid that keeping Yah's law is too much for us.
Right. And it's not simple to go against the grain, and that's what Yahweh requires of us.
Right.
So regardless if it's simple or not simple, it is required, and if it's required, it must be done. I believe we have another call. If the caller is still there, no, we don't. Okay. Okay, sister, we want to go ahead and try and complete a little further. I think the next captivity we were dealing with was a Greek captivity.
Yep. And the Greek captivity is also mentioned in the book of Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 11, it talks about Antiochus Epiphanes, who was one of the generals of Alexander the Great. This was after around 321 BC when the Greeks took over the empire. And with Antiochus Epiphanes, this is what it says in Daniel chapter 11, verse 31. "And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate." What they did was place a statue of Zeus that was created in Antiochus' own image, and you may see a picture of Antiochus there on the screen. They placed that statue of Zeus in the temple. They defiled our people by making us eat swine again. We couldn't circumcise our children, and we could not keep the Sabbath day. So these were the things that happened to us during the time of the Greeks. And of course, many thousands were killed on torture stakes.
Right.
Sounds like we're going to have to continue this, huh? We got a lot to go.
I know. I'm getting the 1 and 2 minutes. Okay, sister, you want to try and go and deal with a little bit of the Roman captivity?
Okay, we can start. Go as far as we can.
Okay.
Well, of course, the biggest lie with the Roman Empire is their way of crucifixion. The Romans, they loved crucifixion. And what we've been taught today is that Christ was nailed to a cross. Well, the Greek word was crux, or the Latin word was crux, which really just means pointed stake. And so, that's a lie. The picture you're seeing right there is a lie. That's not the way he was killed. As a matter of fact,
and that's not what he looked like.
Definitely not what he looked like. Complete lie there. As a matter of fact, the hands would have fallen. It would have torn apart had he been nailed like that. So, there was as much evidence that the so-called cross that he was crucified on didn't resemble it at all. It was actually a stake or a tree, without the branches, of course, that they had impaled in the ground, and they literally nailed him to it. So we'll obviously have to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, you're speaking about the tree. I think even in Psalms it speaks about him being on a tree.
Nailed to a tree.
Nailed to a tree. And, so, and because it's been stated many times as far as the cross being, that word being changed. But sister, I so much enjoyed speaking with you tonight, and I hope you all got a lot out of tonight, and we're going to have to continue at a later date. Shalom. Good night.
Thank you.